Hello, and welcome to Making the Rounds, a podcast by the American Medical Association. Today's episode is part of our Health IT series from the AMA Medical Student Section Committee on Health Information Technology. My name is Skyler Burke. I'm a medical student at the Washington State University College of Medicine, and I'll be your host for today. Today we're joined by Mr. Aaron Martin, Executive Vice President, Chief Digital Officer for Providence St. Joseph's Health, and Managing General Partner for Providence Ventures, which manages around $300 million in venture capital across two funds. This VC group focuses on investing in and partnering with innovative companies in spaces related to health IT, including software, devices, diagnostics, and more. Thanks for being with us, Mr. Martin.
Yeah, thank you.
To get us started, can you explain to our listeners how you are involved in the health information and technology space? What are some things you're currently working on?
Yeah, so my role at Providence, I've been here 8 years. We're a large health system based in Seattle. I've got three kind of components to my team. The first is marketing, so our in and outbound marketing and brand. The second is digital, which is there's an operating component to that and a venture studio component to it. The operating component to it is, my team runs all the websites, the apps, anything the consumer or the patient sees. And then we also have a venture studio that creates new companies. And so we've done that 3 times so far. We actually have invented technology and then spun it out, created, kind of paired it up with management teams and created new companies and spun them out of the organization. And then the third part of what we've done is we've launched a venture fund. We're now on our second fund. It's $300 million in total, so $250 million funds with 28 portfolio companies, 3 of which, again, that we created, but the other 25 we've found out in the market and invested in. And so that's kind of a, broad kind of, discussion about what my role is within the organization.
Thank you. Yeah, I wonder if you could talk a little about maybe a few of these companies that you are either on the board on or affiliated with that you're particularly excited about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the most recent one that we've launched and we spun out is a company called DexCare. And we spun that out last March. And we've been working on that company for 4 years prior to spinning it out. And then after we spun it out, they signed another 6 health systems in a very rapid succession. And then obviously grew very quickly and then raised another $50 million in their second round just recently. So it's been kind of fast and furious there. And what they do that's really exciting is they allow patients who are seeking care sometime in the next, call it 5 minutes, so instantaneous care all the way out to kind of call it 48 hours. So think low acuity, same day care. It's a platform that allows health systems to serve those patients incredibly efficiently, both in a virtual way, so through video visits, et cetera, but then also scheduling them in appointments in retail health or urgent care and those types of things. And so it's really this kind of combined platform that really works. And what it does is it goes out into the internet. It looks for patients through SEO, SEM, and local. So like basically the different ways that people search on Google, et cetera, seeking care. It aggregates that demand. It routes them to the right venue of care that makes sense for them. And then it does load balancing on the back end, so that it makes sure that when the patient actually, is looking for care within, say, a retail health setting or in a virtual visit, that they'll actually get access to the appointment that they need, or they'll have kind of very low wait times. So it's a really efficient platform for this kind of same day care use case, and it's been growing really, really quickly. So that's one example. Another example is the second company that we spun out, a company called Wildflower Health. I think that's an example of how businesses can kind of evolve towards, bigger and bigger offerings. So they started off as a women's health platform, helping women navigate pregnancy, in partnership with their OB. So it basically took everything you need to know about the pregnancy journey, and then kind of, T plus 3 years, into pediatrics, as a woman, and then parse that information out when it was relevant, right? And then what that did is it helped the OBs on the physician side, get the information that their patients need to them, support them incredibly well during that journey, and make their practice more efficient as well. So it's a good example of serving the patient and serving the provider. And then the exciting thing that they've done recently is they're now moving into what are called care bundles. And what that means is they've taken that very high level of engagement. Most of their patients work with the app 3 or 4 times a week, for instance, because it's a very intense time, during pregnancy. And they're starting to put care management around that and take risks and create these things called pregnancy bundles, where it's insured, episodes of care, working with the providers and with the insurance plans. And so they've become an even bigger business than they were day one. And then the first company that we spun out 4 or 5 years ago is a company called Zelf. And this is very relevant to clinicians. I think it's a really exciting technology. It's been adopted by 20 health systems so far. And what it allows you to do is prescribe anything that is not a pharmaceutical, like it was a pharmaceutical, directly from the EMR. So if you've ever been, obviously when you're in practice and you're kind of prescribing through, say, Epic or Cerner or something like, say, atorvastatin, you can now prescribe an app, content, products, or services that you're otherwise probably recommending to patients. And then you can see if the patient actually used that app, watched that video, read the article, et cetera, directly in the EMR, and you don't have to go out of the EMR. And it shows up in their app, in their Providence app, as a card, and it says your physician has recommended that you watch this video, or you use this app, or you buy this thing, knee brace, or whatever it might be. So we basically captured a lot of the interactions digitally and made it easier for physicians to do what they're already doing on a daily basis, which is recommending things outside of just the typical kind of, take this drug, or it's just made it a lot easier. Like typically they're handing over a piece of paper, let's say, or something, patient loses it or whatnot. They can now, prescribe it and see if the patient followed up. So this is 3 examples. I got 28, so I could go on forever, but those are 3 good examples.
Sure. Yeah, it sounds somewhat similar to the Twistle platform.
Yep. And we were also investors in Twistle. So so they do pre and post care management. A little bit different. It texts the patient to make sure that they're prepped, correctly for the encounter, and then it also follows up with them afterwards. Yep.
Well, thank you for those examples. I think that's really helpful to indicate some of your experiences. Speaking of, I know you worked for Amazon for quite some time. I'm curious sort of how that experience in traditional venture capitalism has compared and contrasted with what you're doing in healthcare VC. What would you say are some of the major differences between the two?
Yeah, so Amazon is a large, tech company, and what I would say that I learned there was how does technology function at a very, very large scale. So you could try things very quickly with very little effort. You can kind of plug in new ideas into a demand stream that was already there, like a huge customer base, and you can try ideas very rapidly, right? With it, when I started at Providence 8 years ago, patients were barely online with us. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you know this, but when I first started, you couldn't schedule as a new patient online. You had to already have an existing relationship with us, which was just absolutely crazy and absurd. What other industry do they make you come in and see them first before you can kind of do something online with them? So we changed that We of course innovated, pretty rapidly, but a lot of the digital platform that we built that now, we're now seeing, millions of patients per month on the Providence platform. It took a long time just to build that basic infrastructure and technology. So that was one huge difference in terms of, in the venture world, kind of outside of venture, outside of healthcare. I did this podcast a while back with a good friend of mine named Julie Sandler, and she runs, a tech startup accelerator called Pioneer Square Labs, based in Seattle. They do an incredible job, and they mainly focus outside of healthcare. And we kind of compared and contrast, how do you start and incubate businesses outside of healthcare versus within healthcare? And there's several huge, differences. One is it's a lot easier and a lot faster to test ideas, outside of healthcare because, people's lives aren't at stake, their health isn't at stake, the information is not as critical. You're not messing around with PII typically. Those types of things you can do, like what are called smoke tests, to determine if there's even interest in a product by running Facebook ads, right? Like a product idea, for instance, right? That's a trick used outside of healthcare. Within healthcare, you can't do that. You have to be a lot more planful. Those types of things, I think. But the flip side is within healthcare, there's a lot of obvious stuff that is, if you just pay attention to what goes on outside of healthcare, you can bring into healthcare. So there's not a whole lot of, there's still a lot of really kind of block and tackling basics to where you don't really have to determine whether or not there's demand for it. So for instance, going back to online scheduling 8 years ago, we didn't have to test the notion as to whether or not people wanted to schedule online with us, right? I mean, it's pretty obvious that people would want to do that because they do it in every other part of their lives. When they're booking a table, an open table, when they're booking, with Uber to take a ride, or, for a flight or a hotel reservation, et cetera. So, it's kind of intuitive that these things would work within healthcare. I think we're still, for a lot of these services, pretty much in that area where we're just able to kind of cheat a little bit and see what's going on outside of healthcare and just bring it into healthcare. I mean, a lot of the technologies that my team is applying, well worn outside of healthcare, now just being applied to healthcare.
You took care of the nation. It's time for the nation to take care of you. The AMA stood by America's physicians and patients during the pandemic, and we're not stopping there. We're fixing prior authorization, leading the charge on Medicare payment reform, supporting telehealth, fighting scope creep, and reducing physician burnout. It's time to rebuild, and the AMA is ready. To learn more about the AMA Recovery Plan for America's Physicians, go to ama-assn.org/time to rebuild.
Yeah, and kind of thinking about some of those changes, what are some changes that you have maybe seen accelerated by COVID that you think are really going to be here to stay?
Yeah, I think digital first health services are here to stay. There was this weird debate that I would have from time to time with folks in healthcare about, like, do patients really just want to kind of come into the office and see their clinician all the time versus, like, is telehealth really needed, right? And I think that's been conclusively answered because you can kind of see, even post COVID, when, in between spikes, you still see a much order of magnitude higher rate of telehealth adoption versus what it was kind of pre-COVID. I think that's a big part of it. I think, it's also proven that health systems, if under kind of, if they're focused on a single objective, they can really execute well on technology challenges. I think the other thing that's going to stick around is the use of AI, especially on a patient-facing basis. One of the things that we saw really scale in our response to the pandemic, especially in the early days, was Providence saw the first confirmed COVID case in the United States. So we've been at this the longest than pretty much anybody. And when that first happened, we had we had no real scalable response, for the amount of patients that were kind of calling us or we're going to be kind of concerned about, contracting COVID. It was a very scary situation. You got to think back to there was no PPE, there were no vaccines, and there's very little known about the disease and its effects. So we had a lot of very concerned patients, and so one way that we scaled our response was we built in partnership with Microsoft and with our clinical teams, we built an AI bot called Grace that we fortunately had built, a couple of years before COVID or about a year before COVID. And we scaled to kind of respond to consumers or to patients who were concerned about what do I do? How do I kind of determine my level of risk? Should I go and get a, telehealth visit? What should I do next? Right. Giving them advice in a conversational manner. It was far more scalable than, say, for instance, people trying to call into a call center, for instance, or certainly, and we did not want them showing up at the ED because if they were healthy, we didn't want them getting infected. And if they're infected, we didn't want them in, if they're in reasonably good health, we wanted to stay home until, and so that was, another kind of, technology that is really important. And the third kind of technology, is remote patient monitoring. And so we use remote patient monitoring to remotely monitor thousands of COVID patients at scale to where we could have, a single nurse, keep an eye on hundreds of patients who, again, early in COVID were at-risk patients who had, who may have had COVID symptoms, but were doing well. We didn't want them coming into the hospital. We wanted them to stay at home. And so what we did is we sent them a pulse ox and a thermometer, and this technology would reach out to them 3 times a day, check in with them through SMS and through text, and then ask them to, check their oxygen level and check their temperature. And then it would bring that information into a panel that, that allowed, a nurse to determine, if anybody's, starting to decline. If they did decline, then we'd reach out to them with a telehealth visit. And then if they were, became, severely ill or we were concerned, we'd have them come in through the ED. So these are kind of the 3 technologies that really kind of helped us get through COVID in a meaningful way: telehealth, AI, and remote patient monitoring. And I think those 3 technologies are going to be very important in the future.
Yeah, that's a great point and relates to this next question. In a blog post you mentioned earlier, you outlined some of the ways that healthcare systems and big tech companies can work together. What do you envision this partnership might look like in the future?
Yeah, I wrote an article a few months back about, when Google kind of pivoted its health work, and there was a bunch of stuff going on in the industry about like, big tech has learned how hard healthcare is and they're retreating. And my point was like, God, I hope not. Because if you don't have that level of, technology kind of being applied into a massive industry like healthcare that frankly is lagging way behind from a productivity standpoint relative to other industries, we're going to be in serious trouble as a society. I mean, there's just no way. And these technology companies have the critical mass to develop very sophisticated AI, machine learning that can help the industry. So my hope is that they'll kind of continue to be engaged. I think what you're going to see them do is partner. Very few of them will, compete in a meaningful way because, their business is software and technology. Their business isn't like, delivering healthcare services, right? And honestly, being a software vendor is a lot more profitable than than being a healthcare service provider. So it doesn't even make any sense for them from an economics standpoint otherwise. So I think you'll see a lot of that. I think what you've seen with respect to Microsoft, they bought Nuance, which I think was a brilliant acquisition. That's giving them access to really detailed information in terms of how AI could work meaningfully to kind of support clinicians, because through voice-enabled AI, and it also gets them really to understand clinical workflow, because Nuance is typically embedded within these EMRs, right? So I think you'll see more of those types of acquisitions, hopefully, from big tech, that will get them to really understand healthcare at a deeper level. So I'm hopeful that they'll be able to contribute meaningfully to the industry.
Great. Well, Mr. Martin, what are some of the ways that people can connect with you and follow some of your work?
Sure. Best way to connect with me is either through LinkedIn or follow my Twitter account at Aaron Martin FC. So that's Aaron Martin Frank Charlie. That's my handle. So those are the two best ways to kind of keep an eye on what we're up to and that kind of thing.
Okay, great. Well, everyone, that's all for today. Thank you for listening in, and thank you, Mr. Martin, for taking the time to join us. This has been Making the Rounds, a podcast by the American Medical Association. You can subscribe to Making the Rounds and other great AMA podcasts wherever you listen to yours, or visit AMA-ASSN.org/podcasts. Thank you for listening.